Can Kalki 2898 make the Mahabharata accessible to international audiences? And do we even know what that means? Let's find out together.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Before we get into the main discussion, guys, movie recommendation times for our audience. What's the best recent thing we've seen?
I'm gonna go with Greedy People. Very random movie that I just kind of saw and I was like, do you know what? We'll give it a watch. It's got my boy Hamish Patel in there from EastEnders, and literally it's basically about this murder that happened in this small suburban little sort of town village or whatever, and people that kill this person discover £1 million kind of just sat there in a stash, and then the rest of the movie is just about a bunch of different people or whatever just making really bad decisions how they're going to go and try and get this money from some of the people that have it, essentially. And it's just a cool watch. It's fun entertainment. It's kind of deemed a comedy, but it gets a little bit more serious towards the end of the movie and gets a little bit more brutal with some of the stuff that happens towards the end of it. But it's just my kind of feel good. There isn't too much kind of going on in there. It's just kind of lighthearted, good characters in there, and a very simple story that you can just kind of just pass time with, to be honest. So yeah, that's my movie recommendation.
For me, it was a great week last week. If you guys don't know, it was National Cinema Day on Saturday, so all the tickets were £4. So I managed to watch 3 movies in one day, 3 different cinemas. The best film that I watched last week was The Deliverance, but that was on Netflix. I'm just going to quickly go through the movies that I watched in cinema, which was It Ends With Us, Afraid, and Alien Romulus. It Ends With Us was surprisingly good. It was based on a novel, a relationship, a film about domestic abuse, and it was surprisingly good. I thought it was just going to be a soppy romance film, but no, it wasn't. Like I said, it was very deep. So I would actually recommend that one. Afraid really annoyed me because it started off so good. It was the one based on AI, and there was a twist which made me feel oh, this is interesting as well, because it wasn't like Daniel, I remember you mentioned your problem with AI movies are not accurately told.
My problem with AI movies is that they're not about AI.
Yeah, okay, cool. But
not in the way that it actually exists, and not in the way that is relevant to our lives and will be over the next few years. But the movies still pretend that they are, and that annoys me.
Yeah. This one wasn't really this one became not about AI, but it wasn't in a way where they were kind of changing reality. It was in a way where the AI was kind of I think it was a demonic force. I was oh, this is an interesting twist. But it just the storyline went from A to D. There was a part in the middle which was just unfinished. I was oh my days. It just went. Act 1 was great. Act 2 and 3, no, it just wasn't finished. It felt like they just bypassed the story. So that movie could have been a good movie, but for me that was underwhelming. So wouldn't even recommend you guys go and watch that. But The Deliverance, that is the movie which I would recommend you guys to go and watch. It's a Netflix movie based on a true story. I did not know this. I was oh crap. This was a very unsettling movie. A movie based on a house which is pretty much possessed by a demon or the devil. And then it slowly it slowly manifests in the children, especially the young boy, which it pretty much takes over. But yeah, that movie was really good. The reason I felt like it was really good is because I don't think I've seen an Exorcist film in that type of environment. The environment that you usually see Exorcist films Italy or a lot usually with a Caucasian family in a posh set, not posh settings, but you know what I'm saying? Whereas this one was okay, a black family in the hood type of environment, and I was oh crap. And obviously there was situations that the family were going through in terms of finances and stuff, so it was real, but at the same time, as well as it being supernatural, mixing the two. So I was oh, this is pretty sick. It was a really there was unsettling moments as well. I was yo, this is it was scary. I even checked on Twitter. It was trending on Twitter as well. I think it's #1 on Netflix. I was this was a good watch. I'd say you guys should go and watch it.
So my best recent thing last week was a movie called Significant Other, which is a 2022 science fiction horror movie, essentially about a couple who go into the woods to kind of talk some things through. They're kind of at a pivotal point in their relationship, and the girlfriend specifically has some issues she needs to work through, and they're kind of trying to get away from everything for a while and kind of just talk it out and so on. And then they discover something evil in the forest, and it kind of has an interesting idea at the center, just well realized and well acted. And I enjoyed it, even though it does some things that are usually pet peeves of mine. But I just found myself enjoying it all the way through. And it's one of these little streaming movies that nobody really has heard of, but it's way above average for that kind of movie. And if you just want to see some people kind of hike through the Pacific Northwest and kind of encounter something otherworldly and kind of have to deal with it, but in a way that loops back to who they are as people and what they're going through in that moment without it being too sappy or anything like that. Like this does that. And it's got some good performances in it. And it's basically, the cast, I think, is 4 people in the woods. And it's a very small movie, has one idea, it executes that idea. And it's definitely worth a watch.
Cool. Now, guys, it's time for the main event, the main discussion. Daniel, can you please give the audience a synopsis?
All right, so Kalki 2898 is an Indian mythological science fiction movie that is kind of hard to summarize. It's essentially taking Hindu scriptures and kind of taking the events of the end of days as described in those scriptures and then turning it into a science fiction epic. And essentially it's about, you have these cycles of reincarnation where the gods return to the world every 6,000 years to fight it out, essentially. And in the lead up to that, the world kind of decays and gets increasingly cruel and evil and harsh until it culminates in this big epic showdown between good and evil. And the movie is essentially what happens in the kind of lead up to that. So the world is a devastated wasteland with rampaging marauders and something out of a Mad Max movie. And all of civilization is kind of collapsed into this one city called the Complex, where essentially all the wealth is being hoarded. And there's this god king who kind of runs everything. And he's basically anticipating the birth of the reincarnation of Vishnu called Kalki. I think I might have gotten that a little bit wrong, but the champion for good is supposed to be reborn in this time. And the evil guy is essentially anticipating that and is essentially hunting down and imprisoning pregnant women and is kind of extracting life force from them in preparation for this big showdown. And the story is essentially about a woman who is pregnant, who it is confirmed later on in the movie is carrying essentially the reincarnation of this champion for good. And she's essentially being rescued by rebels, and then the Complex goes after her, trying to retrieve her and trying to defeat the rebels. And that's essentially the plot. So what did we think of Kalki 2898?
Okay, let me start. I appreciate and acknowledge there's different styles of cinema. Different countries make movies their own way, right? So I can definitely appreciate this film. However, I'll be honest with you guys, it was a hard watch. I think I had the same problem with this, the same problem I had with the film KGF. Just like KGF and just like with Kalki, the serious moments, as in like the serious tone moments, minus the theatrical fight scenes and the musical element to this film, the serious tone moments I really enjoyed. That's why I think what's his name, the character with the rock, his name was Ashwapama, was it? Ashwapama?
Ashwatthama, yeah.
Yeah, his character I think was definitely needed. He did a unbelievable job. I feel like his character was definitely needed because he was the one that kept the movie serious. But like I said, it was definitely a hard watch because it felt like I was watching a theater show at times. Even though I understand that that's like their style, because I have seen Indian movies before, like especially like KGF. So like I can tell that there's a big musical element, to these movies, and like the big like, just unrealistic theatrical fight scenes are another big element to like the action movies. So I think that's just something that you need to kind of like get used to if you're like a first-time viewer. So those were my issue with the film. But like I said, for me, there was a lot of music and there was a lot going on, and I think there was a lot of redundant scenes. Like, as in, not, I wouldn't say redundant scenes, but the scenes were longer than they had to be. But overall, I had an okay experience.
Yeah, I think my opinion is not too dissimilar with this. Like, it was kind of tough to get through, to be honest. Like, I think for the first like hour or so, I think I was a little bit lost in terms of like what was happening or what the story was kind of meant to be in the movie. I was enjoying kind of the different visuals and sort of the settings that they were trying to sort of set up in this movie. I thought they did that sort of quite well, and they introduced some like kind of cool technology in here as well, in terms of like some like the weapons and the cars and stuff like that. Some of it was like, okay, cool. I can see that, you know, this is good imagination in there, but it just kind of like took a while for me to like kind of like properly understand the story that they were trying to tell in this movie. And to be honest, I don't know. Genuinely, like I don't think I've got like too much kind of like say, because I just like was just like struggling to get through this, and I was just like kind of like waiting for it to end, to be honest. And I think that's probably more so to do with just like the first hour of the movie, where it just kind of like lost me. And then by the time that we really got to like the second and third act of this movie, I wasn't really connected with any of the characters at all, and I didn't quite care about, you know, the rebellion or anything like that at all. And it was just a movie I watched for 3 hours, which was way too long. It didn't need to be 3 hours. They could have cut this down significantly. So yeah, I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. It's not really much. It was just like, yeah, it was there. It was a movie. It was watched.
Yeah, I think we're broadly in agreement, right? So going into this, I was kind of aware of the fact that I'd seen a couple of Indian movies, but not many. But I kind of know what they're known for, right? And there were several hurdles to jump over for me to get into this movie. One of them being that the style of storytelling is just very different. And then the second one is that this leans heavily into Hindu mythology, right? And I just don't know the first thing about Hindu mythology and the teachings and the traditions of Hinduism. No idea. Like, I've heard the name Vishnu before, and that's about it. And so everything in this was new to me, right? And then the third one is that this movie is really heavy on the fan service. I did a little bit of research, and the actors for Bhairava and Roxy specifically are mega stars in South India. And people, for the most part, just showed up to see them do cool stuff. And I just don't care, like, because I don't know those actors, right? I'm not part of that fandom. And a couple of weeks ago, in our Deadpool and Wolverine review, we talked about how I went to see that movie with my parents, and how they were politely singing through a movie that in order to understand that movie, you needed to be on top of 25 years of superhero movies, as well as news about superhero movies. And if you were not in the loop on that, the movie just made no sense, even though everything in the movie did make sense. And now I have more sympathy for what they went through, because this movie is exactly like that for me. Like, I understood that stuff was going on and that it probably meant something, and I just had no idea. Having said that, I think the movie did a decent job, actually, of kind of introducing those topics. So this whole idea of the champion being reincarnated and the cycles and the age of Kali and stuff like that, that actually gets explained in the movie, right? And I think that's the big picture stuff that needed to be there. But then there was other stuff in there that, like just to give one example, in the very end, the main character kind of becomes aware of being the reincarnation of Vishnu, right? Or an aspect of Vishnu. And that was not made clear to me. Like, you have to know that. You have to know who these characters are. Same thing with Ashwatthama. If you are into Hindu mythology, if you know those stories, then you know who that is. It's a bit like not knowing Christian mythology at all, and then seeing that there's a guy there called Noah, right? You just have to know who that is, right? And the movie's not going to explain it to you, and if you don't know these things, then you have no chance, right? So that was basically my overall impression of the movie.
Do you guys think they should have approached this film like Dune? Because at the end of this movie, it seems like there's going to be a part 2.
Yeah.
So with Dune, like we've seen Dune 1, they pretty much explain the world that we're living in, right? For like, obviously, because this Dune is based on a novel. So with Dune, so I think they did a good explanation of pretty much what's going on in this world to people who have never read the novel. So with Kalki, do you think they should have done the same approach? Because I think that's what we're all in agreement. That's sometimes with the story we didn't really. I feel like the reason why we couldn't engage with the film the way other people have with this movie is because we didn't really know the backstory, and we're still kind of confused a bit with the storyline. So do you think they should have kind of like had the approach for this movie, where it's like, okay, they're pretty much explaining, the history?
The problem with that is that it's not meant for us. This is not an adaptation of Hindu mythology and end times prophecies for a non-Hindu audience. This is made by and for a South Indian audience. And for them, they probably all know this. And it just so happens that this movie became popular enough and commercially viable enough that it got pushed out to international audiences, and like we are kind of left to fend for ourselves, right? Like this was not made with us in mind. Whereas Dune is not just made for people who know the books, right? It's meant for general audiences, and it's trying to make that world and those concepts accessible to somebody who has not heard of it before. So that is different in that way. And now I actually kind of want somebody to do just that, where they make a story like this, but for an international audiences. That does take its time to explain all of these concepts and establish characters, and kind of just goes like approaches the story from just assuming that nobody knows anything, and just establishes every important idea and every important character, and not just the core concepts, but everything you need to know. That's just that you can just take that movie and just understand it like as a self-contained thing. And I think that could be really cool, but that's not this movie.
So from what we understand from the story, what did we like about it?
I actually like the mythology part best. That was the best part for me. So this movie kind of has two different parts to it. One of them is the mythological part about just taking the events as described in the scriptures and just saying this is just happening, right? That we're showing a time in the future where this will happen. And then you've got the science fiction aspect of it, everything to do with Bhairava and all these other characters and all the things about the complex. And that I thought was the weakest part. And I think the movie really suffers from spending like half of its 3-hour runtime.
I think the complex story idea was the weakest part?
Well, the ground level sci-fi stuff I thought didn't work at all. What like I always got interested when we got to Yaskin and his schemes and or like Ashwatthama and like all of that stuff. That was really interesting, and that's kind of where I kind of paid attention again, and where like I really got interested. My problem with the sci-fi stuff is that it's so rote and so cliche, and also it doesn't do anything. Like what's especially confusing to me is that it just outright copies American science fiction, like with no alteration. Like it's all recycled characters and technologies and aesthetics. And it like there's little things related to the complex that I think have some bearing on Hindu iconography and whatever. But everything to do with the ground level sci-fi stuff is so derivative. It's incredible.
Well, you could argue that a lot of sci-fi is like a lot of just films in general is repurposed though. They just added their own extra spice.
Yeah, but like there wasn't like a distinct aesthetic. There wasn't like the complex didn't even have interesting uniforms or something. It just all felt like just reassembled pieces of other movies that the director had seen. And actually that's kind of the opposite of what I expected. What I expected was that, okay, the mythological stuff is going to be over my head, but then there's the sci-fi stuff that eases me into the story. And it was the exact opposite. I thought the mythology stuff was not exactly approachable, but it was there was something going on there, and I could figure it out. Whereas the sci-fi stuff had nothing going on or very little, and it also wasn't interesting. I don't know, like it's just the radars are generic radars. The complex is just like outside of what Yaskin is doing with the serum. That's just on the ground level. The whole thing about how they control the last city in the world and whatever. That's just so rote and so basic that just I could not get into it. And I expected that to be my on-ramp, right? And that's kind of why it stuck out to me so much, because I thought that was the part I could enjoy, and then the mythology stuff is also there. But it was the exact opposite.
For me, I actually enjoyed like the complex storyline, even though it wasn't executed the way that I wanted it to be executed. I enjoyed the introduction of it because it kind of gave me Hunger Games 3% type. If no one's seen 3% series, you should go watch it. It's amazing. But it kind of gave me those type of vibes. So that's what kind of got me hooked. I was like, oh, okay, so everyone's kind of like fighting to get into that society. So I was just waiting to see what that society was like over there. I don't think it was executed the way I wanted it, because we only like saw briefly of the complex when the scene where what's his name, the main guy, the fighter. Yeah, and his girl were pretty much on the horses, and then we saw like a brief moment what the complex looked like. I was like, oh, that's amazing. I wanted them to kind of build up more towards that, but it is what it is. We didn't get that, but for me, that's what got me hooked. Also, I liked the lab scene as well. where they were pretty much like impregnating the women. That scene, like those were like serious tone moments for me, which got me hooked. This is like those were scenes that I wanted to see more of, like just like the serious stuff. Because I
Yeah.
think the serious stuff was done good, like it was done really good. I felt like do you guys felt like there was a bit of symbolism going on with like the whole the female lab, like in like the symbolism which I thought was going on was because we do know that there is like an issue in India. I'm not too like educated on it, but not the views on women, but this like the state of like just
Yeah.
the underlying view of women in terms of like how they're treated and just like how they're viewed. Do you think there was any symbolism there going on that's linked to that?
Maybe. Like I don't know what like who the director is and what his
Mm.
attitudes are and stuff like that. I mean, probably, but it's also like I've seen that in 100 sci-fi movies, right?
Mm.
Like Mad Max did the same thing, Fury Road, where
Mm.
kind of reproduction in the wasteland is being weaponized and is scarce, therefore it's valuable, therefore it gets controlled. I did actually think that part was the more interesting stuff because that led into Yaskin's scheme, right? Where it's not entirely, I don't think it's entirely made clear, but I think he's kind of just collecting life force to power up for the big fight, right? And that's why he's doing it. And also because he wants to prevent Kalki from being born. That was kind of my impression. And I thought that was really cool. Like when kind of these two worlds collide, right? Where you've got like the worldly like dictatorship that just wants resources, stuff like that. But also there's like something spiritual going on, right? Where the leader kind of exists on a different level and has different goals from the organization. Yeah. And this was done in Star Wars, right? Where the Emperor existed in a completely different level from the Empire, right? They had completely different outlooks on the universe. And actually Blade also kind of did this, where the bad guy was kind of trying to fulfill a vampire prophecy in order to usher in a new age. But the organization itself was essentially a mafia organization. And those two things kind of existed at the same time, but they didn't quite fit together. So whenever science fiction does that, I'm interested, right? Like when, like the thing that really got my attention, like I didn't know very much going into this movie. I kind of just started watching. So which means the first 5 minutes or so were quite the trip when suddenly there were like gods on chariots, like shooting magic arrows. I wasn't sure which movie I was in, but very quickly I kind of figured out what was going on, and then that was, and my interest kind of went up at that point, right? Because this collision between kind of the very mundane struggle for survival in like on the ground level, and then the big epic meddling in the affairs of gods and trying to manipulate prophecy and all of that, like those two things coexisting in one world, like that's really interesting to me. And I wish that idea had been an Avatar movie. It's just my thing.
I'm pretty sure there were Star Wars references and inspirations.
Oh yeah. This just liberally took from pretty much every science fiction movie.
Do you guys feel like they did the science fiction movies justice?
Because I just thought it was just very unmotivated. Like we had a similar conversation with Rebel Moon, right? And this is a much better movie than Rebel Moon, right? I'm not doing a direct comparison, but one of the things that bugged me in Rebel Moon is that nothing was motivated, like how the bad guys operate and why they're like what their uniforms look like and character designs and stuff like that, right? It all seemed very random and just stuff you've seen in other and better movies. And there was a little bit of that in this movie. Something like the uniforms of the foot soldiers of the complex. Those were just body armor and biker helmets. Like they looked like every science fiction movie from the 2000s. And that was just a little bit of a shame, right? And like I've always kind of said, I'd like to watch more science fiction from other cultures, right? Not non-Western cultures. Because I imagine they have other ideas going on in other concepts and other aesthetics. Like it's not all World War II. It's not all, now there are certain ideas that are really entrenched in Western science fiction, right? And mostly events from World War II and after, 1984, stuff like that. And I've always kind of wanted to kind of see some science fiction that just drew from a different reference point. And I was hoping to get that from this, and I didn't really, at least not in the sci-fi half of the story. Maybe that's why it rubbed me so much the wrong way.
Like I said, I definitely saw, the inspirations from Dune. Definitely saw Dune as well. Definitely saw Star Wars. I definitely do agree with what you're saying in terms of like it just felt like it wasn't motivated enough. But I do like. I appreciate they attempted, because I think the general consensus is that this film was a milestone for India, as in like,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to like the whole cinematography and the CGI. So it seems like the way that this film was presented is that it is evolutionary for Indian cinema when it comes to the sci-fi genre. So eh, we could argue that, listen, this is pretty much their first try, which is why
It is
you know,
pushing the envelope, right? Like I think this
yeah.
is the third biggest movie for a South Indian movie, I think. I did a little bit of research just on the circumstances of how this movie was made, and it is a big deal for the Indian movie industry. And if we are used to things like we've had some really good science fiction here in the West, right? We've got Dune Part 2, we've got Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Those things are just firing on all cylinders, and like the visual language, everything is very, very mature, like very refined and very deliberate. And this does feel a little bit like trying to figure things out, and I think that should be applauded. And I think you should kind of scale your expectations accordingly a little bit. It's just like storytelling isn't new to anybody, right? Like I just thought there were really elementary issues with how the story was told, and some of this is just storytelling conventions from Indian movies, right? The fact, like for instance, like there was this scene where Bhairava gets introduced, and he is like so jaded and so aloof that he toys with these henchmen who are threatening him, and he doesn't want to fight them, and they can't make him, and they get increasingly frustrated. And I understood what the scene was going for, but it didn't have to last 15 minutes.
That's what I was saying, and that was my issue, is because I think there's certain scenes that was just dragging and it didn't have to. But I think we have to kind of like accept that that's their style of like that's just their style. Because like with KGF, it was a long film. I felt like it was a long film as well, and there was just certain scenes which didn't need to be there, but that's just their style. So it's just one of them ones where it's like, okay, the international
and
audience.
I've heard that audiences go nuts for the actor. Like just watching him be like a smarmy Han Solo type for 15 minutes is just a treat. And it wasn't for me, right? I just wanted the story to get on. And I think this is kind of indicated to me that maybe I just don't like Indian movies, as harsh as that sounds, because it seems to like the tastes all seem to go in the exact opposite of what I like. I like brevity, I like focus on character, and I like focus on story. And the spectacle is nice, but it has to be in service of those three things.
Yeah.
And Indian cinema seems to be the exact opposite, and this movie confirmed that suspicion that I had. And it's kind of made me less likely to check out other Indian movies, because I'll probably not like them just on a basis of style before we get into quality or anything else.
Yeah. I feel like,
and that's okay, right? Like there are like different styles are for different people. It's just a little bit unfortunate, but that's how it is.
Even like some of the scenes where you have like the action star just like standing there and like playing like the kind of like dramatic music and stuff like that, to like really, and again, like you said, it's because like these like actors are like, you know, super big over there, and they're like trying to highlight it. It's almost like you mentioned in Deadpool and Wolverine, when you've got sort of Wesley Snipes and that kind of like walking into the room, and you know they take...
Imagine watching that and never not having seen Blade and wondering why that's such a big deal, why this middle-aged guy in the sunglasses is there, and he just says two lines, but everybody goes nuts over it.
Genuinely,
it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much. So like when all that was going on, I was a bit like, okay, this is taking me out. This is not what I'm here for. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's for a set audience who sort of appreciated it more than I did.
And Roxy seems to be the same way, right? Apparently that actress is the biggest actress in India or South India or something. She's just a megastar, and her just being in a movie like this is just spectacular, apparently. But I didn't get anything out of that character. As far as I'm concerned, she does nothing.
So what does this have over Dune? It's not Dune, sorry, not Dune. I mean, no, Rebel Moon.
Oh, Rebel Moon. Oh, like this is much more deliberate. Like this actually tells a story. Like I think the first hour needs to be redone completely, and that time should be used to have a point of view character that doesn't know anything about the prophecies and the legends. And like this, actually, I think it should be about, what's her name? The little girl. Trying to find her name.
But you know what? Interesting about the little girl. Sorry, just I think I did enjoy kind of like the mystery, because at first I thought she was the I thought she was linked somehow. I feel like she was like the chosen one, or
Yeah.
someone that would like light up the stone or something. You know what I'm saying? So I did enjoy kind of like the built-up mystery to finding out who the one was.
So the character's named Raya, right? She's this little girl
Yeah.
who's supposed to be sold off to the complex, and she escapes and kind of starts tagging along with Ashwatthama, and she's kind of witness to his awakening, right? Where he kind of comes out of exile and hibernation because the prophecy is coming close to being fulfilled, and she kind of witnesses it. And I think if the movie had been from her point of view, and she goes from not knowing anything because she's like a wasteland orphan, and then kind of stumbles into this immortal guy who's preparing for the end of times and has for the last 6,000 years. That's a really cool story, and you could do like this, like have those two be kind of the two different sides of the story, right? He is wisdom and experience, and he knows everything that's going on in the big picture, and she's kind of young, naive, interested, and curious, but is figuring stuff out together with the audience, right? And those two together, I think, would be a holistic look at what's going on. And if that had been like the focus of the story, I think it could have been really cool.
Yeah. Question: which character stood out for you? Character story stood out for you? Because for me, it was definitely Ashwatthama, and it was like the whole relationship dynamic between her and the girl. I do feel like them two deserve more screen time, and his story was definitely something which I think they should have delved in a bit more. I think it would have. Yeah, I just think it would have improved the story, just made it more engaging for international audiences, because kind of like seeing someone, because like we know what his goal is. Like he wants to die pretty much, and in order for him to die, he needs to kind of like, he needs to find the chosen one and like protect the chosen one. So I think kind of
I think he's cursed to live until the end of days or something.
Yeah.
Or at least until the final battle is over, right?
Yeah.
So he wants to find Kalki, and he basically wants to hurry along the prophecy from being fulfilled, right? Because then he can die.
Yeah, but that storyline is interesting. Do you know what I'm saying? So then even with the introduction of the little girl, kind of seeing his character with them two, it could have been like Loki could have been like a John and Terminator type of storyline.
Yeah.
So I just think that was a missed opportunity.
The movie actually does kind of spend quite a bit of time on Raya, right? A bunch of exposition comes from, like, is given to Raya by Ashwatthama, right? And like it's already happening, and it's probably already more than an Indian audience needs. I'm not sure. It seems a bit like the audience would just know the stuff, but like it's already halfway there, right? And it seems to me like Bhairava is only there because his actor is such a megastar, and it's actually not his story.
Yeah.
Or like it seems a bit like he should be a supporting character who becomes more important in the second part, because towards the end he kind of like he is kind of the. I found that part a little bit confusing, but I think he is the reincarnation of Kana, who is a warrior who will fight in the final battle, and kind of the arch enemy of Yaskin, I think.
Yeah.
Not sure, and not entirely sure. This is the part where I got a little bit fuzzy for me. But it seems to be like he's the reincarnation of this champion, and he's not been aware of it, and he briefly becomes aware of it during the final battle, and then it goes away again, and then he's Bhairava again. And it seems to me like he should have been kind of a minor villain, because he's going after Sumati, right? And he should.
But he was kind of like a minor villain, though. He became a minor villain.
He was also kind of the hero.
True, which is why I found his character very interesting. I think that was done really well, because like he was kind of like a hero, but he was like a anti-hero in a way, because
he was Han Solo, right?
Yeah,
he's the jaded guy who's seen everything, who's given up on caring about anybody or anything, and then he stumbles into events that kind of bring back his nobility, right? This is very clearly the same kind of character arc. But I think there's a reason why Han Solo is not the main character of Star Wars, because he's more interesting as a supporting character, where you're not sure if he's going to be a hero or a villain, or you're not exactly sure where he's going to go. And if he had been kind of like a Boba Fett character, right, just to stay within Star Wars, right, where he's trying to go after Sumiti, and he keeps coming out, like he keeps appearing throughout the movie, and he keeps failing, but he gets closer and closer, and he's clearly a formidable foe. And then in the final battle, like this avatar in him awakes. And then he's a different, and that leads him to become more noble in the second movie. I think that could be really cool. But he's played by a megastar, and so he has to be the center of the first hour. I think now that we talk about it, I think that's what kills the movie. I think cut everything of that and just focus on Raya, and have kind of spend more time establishing the key characters. And like we spent very little time in the Resistance, right? in Shambhala. Like, we spent a little bit of time there and we hear about it, but mostly just that it exists. And if we had gone there once or twice before the big battle, like for supplies or something, or there was a subplot with one character who is in Shambhala, like you asked earlier what my favorite character was. And maybe not my favorite, but a standout for me was the names, Kyra. Kyra was just a normal human being.
Which one was Kyra again?
So there was this guy who saves Sumeti from... So there's this woman who has infiltrated the complex and she tracks down Sumeti and she extracts Sumeti from the complex. And there's like a getaway driver. Right, and there's 3 people on the truck to get Sumeti to safety.
Yes.
There's the older guy, a younger guy, and a woman. And the woman is Kyra. And she's the one with the foldable speeder bike who kind of throws bombs and stuff like that. And number 1, she had the best fight scenes. And number 2, she had the best character because she seemed like a normal person and who was not a cardboard cutout and just had humanity because she cared about the mission, but she also cared about the boyfriend and wanted to keep him safe. But she realized, like, they're on a dangerous mission and the mission is more important than either of them. And like, there was a real character there. And I it really stood out because the other characters were a little bit cardboard cutout. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And I cared more about her than I did about Bhairava. And she dies very quickly is the unfortunate thing.
They undercut death as well. Because do they not bring back the guy that she blew herself up with? Or they kind of like show him popping back up?
I'm not sure about that. I think she takes out one of the radar bikes. But it doesn't matter because there's 20 more.
No, there was that guy. Do you know the guy that had with Bhairava at the very start? The sort of the goons or whatever. I can't remember what they were or whatever. But they had like the main guy that was like kind of like part of that. I'm very sure there's a scene where he kind of like comes out of the dirt towards the end, towards like.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which isn't he the one that she blows herself up with?
I believe so.
Yeah, so which is what like I kind of like picked up on that and I was like, it's a bit annoying because like they undercut her sacrifice. Yeah. Even though I don't think she needed to sacrifice herself, someone just needed to shoot him while he was like trying to climb on her.
Yeah, I mean it was a heroic sacrifice and it was fine. And maybe if she'd been around for another half hour, maybe she would have overstayed her welcome or something. But she just stood out, right? Like the performance and you know what the character got to do and stuff like that. So that was really the interesting part.
I think I was gonna say for me, the character that kind of was like maybe not even like the most interesting word like that, but just had like a moment where it kind of took me a little bit was actually the woman that saved Sumita from sort of the laboratory, like her, because I was so sure like she was like brainwashed and like believed in like the mission that she was sort of that she or the purpose that she was serving in terms of like trying to get pregnant and sort of deliver this or sort of hold the baby for more than 150 days or whatever. I was so convinced she was like that person. So then when even when sort of there's that scene when she's like pleading her for help and then she just like says it's okay, trust me, and she takes the gun and gives it back to the security guard or whatever. I was a bit like, oh, she's like fully gone, she's fully brainwashed or whatever. And for her to then be a rebel fighter towards the end and like actually like had this plan, which I don't know how good the plan was, but the plan worked anyways. But for her to be like an actual rebel fighter as a 360 of it was actually quite interesting and was like a point in the movie which kind of stood out to me.
It seems like one thing that we can like give this film is like the way that they executed the whole unraveling of a mystery. Do you know what I'm saying? I think they definitely did that very well because like you said, like there were times where we thought, okay, this person was somehow linked to the chosen one or was the chosen one or was, do you know what I'm saying? So I think they did that very well. And another thing about Indian
just quickly about chosen ones, like in Western storytelling, the chosen one is kind of a dirty word where we take it to be synonymous with bad storytelling. And here I thought the entire thing was built around there being chosen ones, right? Like the entire world works according to this. And people still have a choice in terms of how they react to it or what they do about it. And that was kind of, I thought it was kind of interesting that by introducing this mythological aspect, it kind of turns this chosen one trope that we kind of consider a cliche back into something more interesting.
Yeah. Because
it now becomes part of this big epic cycle of good versus evil and that unfolds over the course of thousands of years. And it happens on such a big time scale that all of human civilization has kind of happened in between important events, right? They just like it happens every 6,000 years. In those 6,000 years, all of human history happened, right? And like I just thought that was interesting that by introducing this mythological angle, it actually turns this idea back into something interesting.
And also, like it also I liked how it created separation even within the same camps in terms of opinion. Like obviously there was people within the same camp that didn't believe in the chosen one, others did, and the way that there was like a battle going on, but not like a physical battle which destroyed it, but there was definitely tension grew out of it, and just like it built on the whole mystery theme to it.
Yeah, not everybody was equally on board with getting Kalki reborn, right?
Mm.
Like not everybody cares about that, and not everybody cares about it to the same degree.
Now, action. So it seems like, you know, like the whole spectacles, I think, was mainly produced from the action scene. So there's definitely, they have their own style when it comes to action scene. I'd say it's definitely different to like Western movies. I think with like Indian movies, there's there's an incorporation of like the whole musical element to it. So how do we feel about Indian action scenes?
I can only go off this movie.
Yes.
Like I've seen,
but let me just kind of like say, because from the Indian movies I've seen, pretty much the same vibe.
I've seen like clips where it's really over the top and cartoonish, but in a good way, like in a deliberate way. And I was kind of expecting those kinds of things, and I was kind of disappointed because everything seems very small and very slow and very unimaginative. And I don't know what like martial arts traditions there are in India. Like I'm more familiar with like Chinese and Hong Kong cinema, which are very strong on martial arts, right? There's a major focus, and I don't know what of that exists in Indian cinema, but this was like very slow. Like there's a scene where Ashwatthama like picks up 6 guys and kind of slams them into the ground, and I've seen in other reviews where people go nuts over that scene and how great it's choreographed and how over the top and ridiculous it is, and it's not really. It's like he picks up a few guys and then slams them into the ground and has some dust, and that's it. Like I didn't like people like it doesn't seem like a lot of creativity went into like the fight choreography. Like there was some cool stuff, like the showdown between Ashwatthama and Bhairava when he's when he's in his car mech thing. Like there was some neat visuals there, right? But by and large, the action scenes I thought were pretty underwhelming. And I don't believe that skill set doesn't exist in Indian cinema. I imagine like that it has to exist. I'm sure there's good ones. But I didn't feel like there was a lot of creativity or spectacle in this. It felt, I think it might have something to do. I think it kind of got caught up by COVID restrictions or something like that, where there had to be reshoots and there were delays and whatever. And maybe they couldn't do exactly what they wanted. But I kind of care about the final product, and the final product on the action front is not that great. Like there's a couple of things, right? Like I mentioned the fight between Ashwatthama and Bhairava, and there's also the chase scene where Kyra gets to do some cool stuff. That works good too. After that, it's kind of slim pickings.
Hervé, how did you feel about like just fight scenes?
like Daniel said, I wasn't really wowed by anything, to be honest. There wasn't really anything that was like stood out again, apart from like the chase scene with Kyra and like the speeder bike stuff, and like the way like she was like kind of like flinging it out and stuff like that was like pretty cool. But there was like just like some like janky stuff in there that I like noticed, like when the guy was like hanging like around the side of the car and he's like kicked and he's like looped himself over, but he's like on the side of the car, but when he's like looped, he's then like kicked through the front of the car, and I was a bit like, okay, that just, I guess I was like, I guess it doesn't really like kind of like flow really well for me. But I don't know, it was a bit underwhelming. There wasn't really anything that like was super impressive, to be honest.
For me, I'd say it was expected. Like I said, I've seen a few Indian movies where the fight scenes do look like that. So I wasn't like, the fight scenes were never going to be the highlight moments for me, because like I said, the fight scenes on there is like they're not really for me. I think they're too like theatrical, and it does look a bit like it looks unrealistic. So I knew for me the fight scenes weren't going to be for me. But yeah,
my formative years were like the early 2000s, where Western fight choreography was very over the top. Right, we kind of started with The Matrix and then went up from there. And I'm used to very over the top stuff and very, very hyper choreographed, very, very superhuman kind of thing. And that was 20 years ago, where CGI was more limiting. And kind of I wasn't really like that didn't quite live up to that. And like you just mentioned something which is kind of important to realize, which is it's kind of hard to distinguish between style and quality, right? I'm not sure to what extent these things are supposed to look this way and what effect they have on the intended audience. I can only report my reaction to it, and my reaction is kind of it's a bit slow, it's a bit unimaginative.
The dystopian world and the technology was used. How do you feel about that?
Some of that was cool. I like the kind of like hologram stuff that he was doing. Is it Barabia, his character? Like some of that was like pretty cool. The bow and arrows in like the kind of like the ancient scenes with like the gods and stuff like that were like really cool, especially like when they were like kind of like splitting each other and stuff like that. All of that's like really cool, and I'm sure it's going to be in like the second movie a little bit more than it was in this one.
This magic bow that kind of shows up towards the end. That was forged. I've forgotten the details, but it was kind of forged by a god, and only a champion of a god can wield it and stuff like that. And it just destroys any mortal that tries to touch it. Like that was some cool stuff there.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed Baraba. I liked his relationship with the technology that was helping him. Pretty much his sidekick.
The AI car.
Yeah, I enjoyed their relationship dynamic. That's when like the comedic scenes. I think the funniest moments was between them two. So I definitely enjoyed how technology was used there.
He kind of gave Iron Man vibes as well at one point when he was like building out his like car and making actual like mech at the end when he's got like the hologram stuff in front of him for that. It kind of gave small Iron Man vibes.
I actually liked his transition because that's the scene where he realized he couldn't get into the complex anymore, and also that's the first time he lost a fight. So it was like, okay, his transition, he still had that like, that comedic tone to him at times, but he was more in serious mode now because this is the first time he lost, and it's the first time that he realized like, damn. So it was pretty much the transition into a villain, which was pretty good. How do we feel? Should I kind of go back to fighting? How do you feel about the final fight? The final fight scene. That looked like a scene out of Star Wars.
The episode 2.
Oh, okay.
Geonosis arena, where the Jedi kind of like dozens of Jedi land in the arena and they fight the droids.
Yeah, that kind of gave me those vibes. And then you had the villain in this film as well that kind of gave me Darth Vader vibes. So even though, because yes, he was in all black, but you could tell there was some sort of Darth Vader inspiration there.
Yeah. Well, which one? Yaskin or somebody, or one of the lieutenants?
I think it was one of the lieutenants. The one that was, what's his name? The one that ended up getting killed by Baraba.
No, not sure. But there's like this guy in the robes, right, with the magic ring, or with the energy weapon kind of thing.
No, I'm not too sure. He's the one. He ended up killing. I forgot his name, but Baraba. I think Baraba. That's the only guy that Baraba killed at the end, like the general.
Yeah, but in either case, there's a couple of cool things. I like Yaskin's design quite a bit, especially once he powers up and it just looks like he looks like a Dragon Ball character, right? Like now it's my turn to bring up Dragon Ball. Like he really does look like a character from that, like just powered up and superhuman, and now he operates on a different level. The fight between the Resistance and the Complex, like those energy shields and stuff like that, those look pretty cool. Like the phalanx formation and the energy weapon, like the balls of energy that are flying, and there was some cool stuff there. Like I have got a little bit of a problem with a lot of sci-fi fighting scenes where they just kind of stand in a field and fight. Like there's no formations, there's no tactics, there's no use of terrain. Like this is Western science fiction, right? Like almost all of them do this, where it's just two sides, two armies kind of approach each other and then they fight. And this kind of did that, but because it had this mythological edge to it, it felt like something out of antiquity. Like I had a little bit of like Greek, Roman vibes to it, right? Like these just armies kind of clashing into each other. And because of the mythology, because there were gods present, it kind of mentally I made a connection to ancient Greece, and it looked like a battle from that time. And so it kind of worked for me, which I understand is clearly not the intention of the movie, right? But I think the fact that the gods are there kind of changes the logic of it. And that kind of makes the energy shields and the armies smashing into each other more palatable. Believable is maybe a strong word, but more palatable. And in that scene specifically, we got a bunch of cool visuals with weapons and the shields and stuff like that, and how they fight. Outside of that, I didn't think the technology looked all that interesting. It kind of seemed like they just drew some sci-fi technologies out of a hat.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene where I think they break into some kind of house and people just have VR goggles on them, and it's not clear why. It's not established that this is part of the world, and it's just there because it's a sci-fi thing. And there were like 20 other things like that. But every time we kind of got a little bit closer to the mythological part, it started being cool again.
I'm going to disagree with you on the Yaskin part, because I know you said he looked cool, powered up. I actually quite liked his like kind of like skinny feel, like design with like the bulbs like bobbing around him and stuff like that. It just kind of gave me Dawson vibes from Street Fighter for whatever reason. And with like the skull on his head, it just like looked super menacing. I don't know. I preferred him. Like when he powered up, he just then looked like just like kind of like a buff like villain guy, and I was like, okay, cool. I like the feel guy a little bit better, but yeah.
Yeah, well, like that's the thing about how he's floating, and there's energy coming out of his skull and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no, I do like him before that, like in his normal form. I do like him too, and like he's got these metal hands that grab stuff for him and bring stuff to him and stuff like it. There was a whole bunch of technology that was kind of out of mythology, right? Like they don't have an elevator; they have a giant statue that lifts people in its palm. If you remember that. When they go to visit Yaskin for the first time, they step on like a platform. And it turns out to be the palm of the hand of a giant statue, and the statue lifts them up to where the supreme leader is.
Yeah,
like there was a bunch of stuff in there that was quite cool. I don't know that really. Like I always like it when there's like
some sort of link,
some kind of through line through the technology, right? Like this is how technology looks in this world, and that didn't seem to exist. But that does mean that occasionally they had a cool idea and kind of just gave us a cool visual, and those would be a couple of examples. But outside of that, it just felt like very like a random mix of sci-fi stuff.
It feels like the ideas that they had was about like came from inspirations, and they were a fan of it, so they just incorporated it into the film. They just put it into the film.
Yeah, with no real filter, right? Or like they didn't make like it's okay to do brainstorming and just write stuff on a whiteboard, but then you have to prune. You kind of have to take out the stuff that doesn't belong, and they kind of skipped that part. And it seems like all the creativity went into the mythological aspect, and it kind of was missing from the sci-fi technology stuff.
Sorry,
which is a problem when it's over half of the story.
I remember what the villain. I remember what his name was, Commander Manas.
I don't see his name right now, but yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, him. He was a highlight for me as well. His character, I don't know why. He was very menacing.
Yeah.
He had his moments. Well, okay, so this seems like it was a film that was introducing international audience. Well, Daniel, you did mention that this seems like it was a movie for us, but by default, it's pretty much a film that's an introduction to Indian cinema.
So I actually have a comparison here. Have you guys seen Parasite?
Yeah.
Korean movie won all the awards a few years ago. Mm-hmm. That is a Korean movie made by Korean filmmakers for a non-Korean audience. And so they introduce a bunch of concepts that that would be obvious to Korean audiences. And they change things to make things more generic. Like it's a chat app. And they don't give it the chat app that Koreans would use that are commonly used in Korea. They use some other name that is more familiar to us, right? So that's an example of a movie that's made for a foreign audience in order to make it more accessible. And this is not that, right? I think it's a complete accident that we saw this movie or that we became aware of this movie. I think it was made by and for a South Indian audience, and it got popular enough and it got good enough word of mouth that it kind of got pushed out to streaming and limited releases and Western cinemas and stuff like that. And then I heard about it from like YouTubers who normally criticize Hollywood for its storytelling, and then said, hey, but this was just a good time spectacle and so on, right? And so it kind of got picked up and amplified by this, but we were never meant to see it in that sense, right? And I think a movie that's made supposed to make this stuff accessible to us would be built completely differently from the start. and actually want
So
somebody to make this movie now. Like I've actually gotten interested in Hindu mythology now. Like it's always been so. Actually, funny enough, like 20 years ago, I listened to a podcast about religion. So like talking about like the mythologies and stories and teachings of different religions, right? And there was a Hindu episode, and the host said something like in that episode compared Hindu mythology to Star Wars, like these big epic wars with gods and champions of gods and larger than life creatures and magic weapons and big battles and whatever. And I remember at that time saying, that sounds kind of cool. I should check that out at some point. And then I never really got a chance because there isn't really any on ramp for somebody. Like, I think the thing that this is based on is the longest poem that was ever written at like 200,000 verses or something. It's not accessible. And every time I try to get into Indian mythologies of any kind, but Hinduism seems to be especially strong for Hinduism, it's just jargon and names that are just impenetrable to somebody who is not already familiar with it. And I think there's like if somebody made a genuinely accessible on-ramp for somebody to just get into this stuff, and I think actually other mythologies should do this too. Like I don't think there's been like a movie that really makes like Greek mythology or Norse mythology or something like that really accessible. Like this is where you start. If you know nothing about this is where you start. That I think is generally missing. And I think these stories are really interesting and compelling and fascinating and so rich. And it's a shame that they're so difficult to get into. And this movie was never supposed to do that for Hinduism, right? But now that I've seen it and I kind of see the potential and I kind of see the appeal of these stories and these characters, I kind of want somebody to do this.
it doesn't seem like they can do it with this film though, because like I said, it feels like it's gonna be a part 2. So it's like, well, you're not gonna.
Yeah. No, this is not. This was never meant to be that, and part 2 is probably not going to. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that in part 2, right? If anything, you start at the beginning, but just somebody should just tell these stories, like in a way that's accessible to somebody who's not already familiar.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it looks like. Does anyone have anything else before we go into last thoughts and ratings? Okay, last thoughts and ratings.
I would agree for mine. It was an interesting peek into different types of cinema. Probably not 100% for me, but not to say that there isn't another movie that could be made from something kind of like Bollywood that, would grab my attention. Yeah, not entirely for me, but I can kind of still respect it for what it was. So I'll give it 5 out of 10.
For me, I have the same rate. I'd give this one a 5 out of 10. It hasn't put me off Indian movies, Bollywood movies. It hasn't put me off it. It's just I pretty much expected the reaction I was gonna have from seeing this movie because, like I said, I am kind of like familiar with the style of films that the Indian industry produces. So I think maybe is a thing like I asked myself, is it a thing where I have to get used to this style and I'll end up liking more of the movies, or is it just a thing where this style isn't for me? So I am kind of like intrigued to, like I said, it hasn't put me off Indian movies, and I'm kind of like intrigued to kind of see more Indian movies to see if there's different styles and if it's a thing where I'll end up gradually liking it, or if it's just a style that's not for me. There was one Indian movie which Daniel, you mentioned as well, that you said looked pretty cool, and it was the film action movie on the train.
Yeah, I don't remember the name.
I think it was called Kill.
That looked like a solid action movie.
Yeah, I think
like something about like mercenaries on a train, or somebody trying to kill somebody on a train or something.
Yeah.
It just looked like I just saw the trailer and it just looked solid.
Yeah.
So
I think I'm gonna go and check that one out as well to see if it's the same style and to see if it's a thing where, if I'll like it. So with this one, it was, like I said, it was okay. I expect, I pretty much got what I expected. It just wasn't for me. In terms of the story itself, I liked the whole complex idea. I think they should have built upon that even more. I liked a few of the character dynamics. I liked the villain, Commander Manas, I think that's his name was. I think he was one of my highlight characters. But just overall, overall I had an okay experience. Okay experience. Wasn't fully for me, but it was an okay experience. It's not a bad movie. Definitely not a bad movie. I could definitely see what they were trying to do. And I feel like we all acknowledge that this was definitely a milestone for India when it comes to the whole cinematography and the CGI. But yeah, I think overall, I had an okay experience with this.
Yeah, for me, I think it just informed me that this is just not my kind of movie. I do think the ideas are much better than the actual storytelling, and like the big ideas that this movie is built around are really cool. I just don't think that the actual story itself is told very well. And this is not just about taste, like where I would have preferred it to be half the length and stuff like that. That's taste for the most part. It's just like the idea is, I think the idea is excellent, and I want somebody to try again and maybe just execute the storytelling a little bit better. And that doesn't mean more like the way I want it, but just a little bit more well-rounded characters and stuff like that. So for me, that's a by rubber out of 5.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Also, please, in the comment section, let us know, based on what you've heard today, let us know what Indian movies you think we would like, pretty much. Because like I said, I think we're all kind of like interested to see if the film industry is pure, like if Indian movies are just like this, or if there's like variations, different type of movies that, like I said, you think that we're like. But yeah, sorry, Hervé, I kind of took part of your. Yeah, but yeah, Hervé, please.
That's fine. And just to add to that as well, like if you can like add any explanations of what we potentially missed in there, and like what Daniel mentioned as well, is that if there's a movie that has a good kind of like introduction into like Hinduism and stuff like that, and like explains the mythology a little bit more clearly for someone that's new to it, it'd be great to know in the comment section as well. Aside from that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.
Definitely, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And yeah, man, we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.